Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Ultimate 1-5, which is a clash of Europe and Japan. This event is coming in at a B tier, so it's not quite the caliber of SmashCon or Toyota Grand Slam 15, but it is still a very stacked event, and I'm really excited because we have that dynamic of Europe versus Japan. I really want to see how Europe does here. For our top 16 seeds, you're going to have Pipo, Naskino, Homika, and Pew in 13th, Rakior, Zemal, Nighthawks, and Spectral in 9th. In 7th place, you're going to have Mezcal and Super Semi, Space and Enfori in 5th, Passeriman in 4th, Asimo in 3rd, T in 2nd, and projected to win the entire thing is Kameme. So let's talk about each Japanese player and their chance on getting upset before top 8. The first one is going to be Kameme, who is our first seed. Now before this, he's projected to play Polynomius to Lucario, then he's going to play Pew, the Min slash Nets player, and then he's projected to play Mezcal, which is Ridley, or Rakior, which is either going to be Greninja or Sora. So if we look at Kameme's record here, as you can see, he has a pretty good record for Su. Now, they haven't played in a long time, but he was able to beat him in the Lucario and Sora matchup. So clearly, he is going to have matchup knowledge there, and I don't imagine he's going to get caught off guard. You have him winning his last 2 sets versus Proto Bonham, as well as his last 2 sets versus Gak. So that's going to be both of Pew's characters being taken out. And then you have Mezcal. Now, we don't have a ton of information versus Ridley, but it's gonna be Ridley Sora. I am very, very, very confident that Kameme can win that one. But of course, the biggest obstacle is gonna be Rakior because he could technically Ditto Sora Kameme, and I think that is really scary. Dittos are the most coin flip matchups in the game because it really is just who is winning the game more. There's no external matchups. It's just player versus player. But to be honest, if it came down to the Ditto, I would still favor Kameme because he has way more experience under his belt, and he's also just a better Sora player, at least a better proven Sora player. But of course, Raikor could also just pull out the Greninja. But then if you take a look at Kameme's record versus Leah, it no longer seems like too good of an idea. Next up is going to be Passeriman. Now, he has to play Grand Radiator, the Puff player, before this, and then he has to go into Homika and then into Space. Grand Radiator, I'm not too worried about. He should be able to overcome that Puff. Can be a bit of a tricky matchup for Fox because you can't get edge guarded off stage. Same thing for Diddy Kong as well, but the characters are good enough that they can just pretty much tier gap Puff if you play the matchup correctly, so not too worried for Passeriman there. Then he would go into Homika, also fairly confident about that because as you can see, he has a 4-0 record versus Yuzu, so he's been very dominant in that matchup. But then it comes to the Inkling matchup against Space, as well as the Aegis matchup. Now, the Inkling one is a little bit easier to gauge. He won his last set versus Showers, but it's a 1-1 record overall, and he lost his last set versus Shiryuki. Granted, this was 10 months ago, and the Shower set was only 1 month ago, so maybe he's been working on the match a lot, but Aegis could be a bit of a tricky one. As you can see, Shuton often beats Passeriman, but to the credit of Passeriman, Shuton is like a top 5 player in the world and definitely the best Aegis player in the world, at least in my opinion. Maybe Spargo is starting to steal that title back, but I don't think that's a super fair metric, so I still do believe in Passeriman to be able to beat Space, but if he is going to beat Space, I think that Diddy Kong is going to have to do some serious work because Fox Aegis isn't a great matchup and definitely not as good as Diddy Kong Aegis, so I think if Passeriman is going to make the winner's side of top 8, he's going to have to rely on the Diddy at least a little bit. Our next Japanese player is going to be T. His first matchup is going to be against Motoji, which is likely going to be Snake or Sephiroth. Now, for data there, T has actually avoided pretty much all of the top Japanese Snakes. He's never played against Dio. He's never played against Hurt. He's never played against Ike. He has played 2 sets versus Shogun, though, and he was able to win them, so I have confidence in him in that side. And he's also been absolutely owning Ken in all their last encounters. Now, I'm sure a couple of these games were Sonic, but as you can see, Sephiroth was definitely tried out with no success, so I'd have great hopes for T to be able to take that set. Then he would go into Naskino. Now, don't have a ton of data character-wise there, but I would assume that T would take that. Both Kazuya and Pac-Man do well enough for Zelda where they should win. Now, I do have to note, though, it's not blowout matches for either character. Zelda definitely can win. It's like maybe even or slight winning for both characters, so it's not impossible that Naskino catches T off guard and makes that upset, but I would just expect T to still be able to win it. His hardest opponent, in my opinion, is definitely going to come from Super Semi. Now, even though he has an amazing record versus Surinoko, he is 3-0 there, I still think that Super Semi is a massive threat just because of the caliber of player that he is. He really is one of the best players in Europe, a hidden talent there for sure, and he definitely could upset a player of T's caliber, but T is clearly confident in the matchup, at least somewhat, so I wouldn't expect the upset, but you never can count out Super Semi. And our final invader is going to be Asimo. Before this, he's supposed to play Blue Regain, then he plays Peepo, and then he plays Enfori. Likely Enfori. Spectral could make the upset, but I'd put my credits on Enfori. So that's going to be Blue Regain on Sonic, People on Wolf. I believe there's also another very good Palutena player named People in EU, so hopefully it's the Wolf player and I didn't get it wrong. If I did, that's my bad. And then you're also going to have likely M4E, which is on the Sephiroth. So the only matchup information we have there are his sets versus Ken, because Asimo, to my knowledge at least, has never played against Sakai. He's never played against Masha. He's never played against a Torie, so we don't have a ton of information there. He has a 1-2 record versus Ken. He did win his last encounter, though, which I believe was Ryu versus Sephiroth, so that gives me confidence for M4E, which is the matchup that I am the most worried about. I don't have a ton of belief that people should upset Asimo. It's definitely not impossible, though. Wolf is a very scary character in bracket, and speaking of scary characters in bracket, Blue Regain on the Sonic. I think Sonic is literally the scariest character you can run into in this game. You could always lose to a Sonic player because that matchup is pretty much always hard. So it's going to be tricky for Asimo, but if he plays his cards right, he can beat a Sonic player. He can beat the Wolf player, even though they are very hard characters in bracket, piloted by amazing players. I would believe in Asimo to overcome it. M4E, though, that's a bit of a different story. Now, the fact that Asimo beat Ken in their last encounter, and it was going to be on the Sephiroth, and he did it 3-0 as well, does give me a lot more confidence, but M4E is an incredibly scary player. He can be Bloom Forever caliber scary player. So I don't think this set is anything to scoff at. I think this is a very real possibility. Even though I haven't predicted any of the Japanese players to get upset, I'm still not going to. If it's going to happen, I would expect it most at Asimo and M4E. We also got to talk about who's going to make top 8 through the losers side, and honestly, I'm not expecting too many upsets. I think the one that I'd be expecting the most would be Nighthawks over Mezcal, considering that is a very good matchup for Lucas. Ridley gets absolutely bodied by the Lucas combos, as well as Nighthawks having a 3-0 record. Now, to be fair, they haven't played in a year, but considering that the matchup is in Lucas's favor, as well as the record is in Nighthawks' favor, I would expect him to make that upset over Mezcal, but the rest of them, I'm fairly confident the top seed goes through. You have Space versus Spectral, and while they've never played, you have Space winning his last 3 encounters with Quake and his last encounter with Siski. Both these players were top 5 in Europe, by the way, and also they are the best Samuses in Europe right now by a long shot. Though Spectral has been getting some very good results, they're not quite on the caliber of Siski and Quick, who Space is seemingly able to beat, so he should have no problem with Spectral. M4E and Zemo, now you don't have any set information there, but I would expect M4E to win over both the Bowser and the Cloud. The Cloud obviously be a little bit more tricky, and honestly, Bowser's a character that can get in Sephiroth's zone and bug him enough to be able to get an upset, but I would still definitely favor M4E there. And our final matchup would be Super Semi versus Rocktower, and they have actually played one time, and it did go into Super Semi's favor recently 3 months ago, but as you can see, Rocktower didn't try out the Greninja, so that definitely could come in the second set, maybe turn the tide of things, but as it's going right now, I would expect Super Semi to take that. And here we are, the top 8, starting with our loser 7th. You're going to have Space versus either Mezcal or Nighthawks, and M4E versus Super Semi. And regardless of who gets through versus Space, I would expect him just to honestly tear gap the play. You're going to have Lucas or Ridley coming through against Aegis or Inkling if you need it, but I would definitely expect the Aegis to be doing a majority of the heavy lifting. And even though Nighthawks has been able to beat Space in the past, and he's only beaten Mezcal once, again, it was 9 months ago, a lot of things can change in that amount of time, I would still expect Space to pull through. I think Aegis is just going to be too strong in both of those matchups. It's not impossible. Both those characters have decent edge guard. I mean, Ridley's Nair off stage is an absolute menace, but I think that's being your only win con isn't going to be enough to take out Space, so these players are going to need to cook up something extra special to be able to get that upset. And then for Super Semi M4E, I would expect Super Semi to take it. I think Young Link does very well in the matchup, and you do have Super Semi winning their only encounter, but to be fair, this was 10 months ago, and M4E has gone from a pretty good player to one of the best players in Europe, like probably top 10 with wins over players like Blue Minority. I already mentioned that in the video, but it is just so impressive, so maybe M4E is cooking hard enough to be able to get over this matchup, but I would still expect Super Semi to take it. Next up, we have winners quarters, Passeriman versus Kameme, and T versus Asimo. Now, for T Asimo, I'm going to go with Asimo to win this one. He has won their last encounter, as well as having a majority of the wins in the head-to-head. But to be fair, they have been trading sets back and forth, at least for these last 2, and both of them were Game 5. The competition is very close, but I think Asimo could seek this set out, and I think it's going to be a very important set for him. If Asimo can get top 2 at this event, I think that's going to be amazing for his mental, because he's been a little bit inconsistent as of late. His last couple events have been a lot better. The second place at Alt Court seems like he fully recovered it. A technically an underperformance at Meisuma, top 13.5, but still, it is a top 8 finish. I think getting top 3 here here, at least matching your seed, is going to be extremely important. I think beating T is a very realistic thing to do, so I'm going to go with Asimo for that one. Then you have Kameme versus Viserion. This one is a little bit awkward because they've only ever played one time in the Sora Fox matchup in a real set. You do have this first to 5 right here, but I don't really know if I want to count that. But this is the set that they played full on in tournament. You're going to have Kameme winning it, but you also have Kameme getting kind of owned in his last 2 sets versus Light. Now, Light, Viserion are very different players, and I am still going to go with Kameme for this pick, but I want to show the data just to prove it's not unlikely that Viserion gets the upset. It's probably like 55% Kameme and 45% Viserion, so it's going to be a very close set, but I do imagine that Kameme squeaks it out. In losers quarters, you got T versus Space and Viserion versus Super Semi. Now for T Space, I would expect T to take that set. As you can see, he's won his last 3 encounters versus Shuton, but a lot of these games were played with the Olimar, but that's because T does so well versus the Aegis. He's been having a lot of success there, especially as of late. Now, it hasn't always been super good, but it seems like he definitely figured something out, so I would expect T to take that. Now, is it impossible that T picks Kazuya, Space picks Inkling, takes a game, then gets the counterpick war and his advantage? Maybe T stays on the Kazuya and it doesn't do well versus the Inkling. Is that impossible to happen? No, I think that's a possibility. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. I would expect T to take that set. And then you're going to have Viserion versus Super 7, which I'm even more confident that Viserion is going to take because, as you can see, he has a 7-1 record versus Suinoko. Now, don't get me wrong. I think Super 7 is an incredible player. He could be a different style of Young Link. Maybe he's used to that Suinoko style. Super 7 style is a little bit different. It messes him up. That's not impossible, but clearly the matchup is very good for Viserion. He's comfortable in it, and I would expect him to pull through. And we have our top 4, Kameme versus Asimo and winners, T versus Viserion and losers. It's a Japan top 4, and to be fair, all these players are probably going to be ranked top 20, and the rest of these players at this tournament probably aren't going to be ranked because Europe just didn't have many opportunities to prove themselves. Some of these players are still very good and can cause upsets, but likely the top 20 show players are going to pull through. And for Kameme versus Asimo in the winner's side of the bracket, I would expect Kameme to take that set. He has won 3 of the 4 times that they played. And to be fair, it says that he used Pit in this set that he lost versus Asimo. Now, I don't actually think that happened. He probably just lost it with Sora, but let's just say that he was trolling with Pit. He wasn't even trying in the only time that he lost. That gives me even more confidence to go with my Kameme pick. And for T Viserion in the loser side of bracket, it is in Viserion's favor overall, but for their more recent encounters, the only time they played recently was 10 months ago at Lay Odyssey, which isn't too recent, but it was in Europe again, and T did win that 1-3-0, so I would expect him to be able to do it again. But clearly, Viserion has been able to beat T in the past. It's not unfathomable that he could do it again, but since he won their last encounter, I'm going to go with T. So for losers finals, we got T versus Asimo, and as I said earlier on, I would expect Asimo to take that one, but maybe T throws off a bit of a tempo change. T is going to have access to more characters than Asimo, so I would favor him in the rematch. Maybe he goes only Pac-Man in the first set, and then win or lose, he could go Kazuya in the second set, or vice versa with the characters, just for a tempo change. He can also just tempo change between games. I think T has a slight maybe counterpick advantage there, especially for the second set, but the record is still overall in Asimo's favor, and I am still going to expect him to take it. But if T is going to beat Asimo, I think Tim doing it in the second set would be much more likely, and our grand finals would be Kameme versus Asimo. And as I said earlier on, it's a very solid record for Kameme, and I don't expect him to drop the set in the grand finals, and I have Kameme, the first seed, being your champ of Ultimate 1 in 5. I know a lot of the bracket, we just went with the projected seeding, but hey, what can I say? This bracket was seeded very well, and all the people that are supposed to win are probably going to win, but who knows? All the events that seem like they're going to be easy are always the ones that are super crazy, so I thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If there's a player I left out at any point in this video, and there probably was because we mainly focused on the Japanese invaders, please just let me know down below. The sport has been absolutely unreal. Thank you guys for everything, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.